Jayapal, and thank you for serving as the chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus that allows us to have this conversation here today.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman Teresa Leger Fernandez. You have been a joy in Congress to have your voice, to have your passion, to have your advocacy. And, this is what makes me so proud to be the chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, because of the words and the passion and the advocacy of Representative Bowman, of you, and of our 94 other members that are part of the Progressive Caucus. And the special order hour that we host for this Congressional Progressive Caucus is about the issues that matter to the Congressional Progressive Caucus. And let me be very clear, progressives have been at the forefront of fighting for comprehensive immigration reform for a very long time. Our Progressive Caucus is extremely diverse. We have members who are part of the Hispanic Caucus, part of the Asian American Caucus, part of the Black Caucus, and the reality is we represent the diversity that is immigration today in this country. And Madam Speaker, I think when I think about immigration, this is personal to me, very personal to me, for multiple reasons. I'm an immigrant myself. I'm one of only 24 members of Congress that serve in Congress that is a naturalized citizen. And when I came to Congress in 2017, there were actually only 6 of us at that time. Then it moved to 12, and now it moved to 24. And that is good that we are here, that we are representing the voice of immigrants who come from all over the world seeking refuge, because that is the identity that the United States has, as a place to seek refuge. I came here when I was 16 by myself. My parents just had a few $1,000s in their bank account, and they used all of it to send me, their child, across the ocean by myself at the age of 16, because they believed that this was the place that I would have the most opportunity. But it isn't just that. It was 20 years ago that in Washington State, I started what was a grassroots effort to organize against the Bush administration at that time. The Bush administration cracking down on immigrants, Arab Americans, Muslim Americans, South Asian Americans, and curtailing civil liberties. And that was the moment that I got involved in grassroots organizing around immigration issues and ended up starting and founding what became the largest immigrant advocacy organization in Washington State, one of the largest in the country. And if John Lewis were here, he would tell you that the first thing that I said to him when I came onto the floor is, "You taught me how to make good trouble." Because I too got arrested multiple times fighting for immigration reform in civil disobedience that was about calling attention to the pain of the country when we treat immigrants with the cruelty that we have treated immigrants with, both Democratic and Republican administrations through the past to today. And yes, Donald Trump did something to the immigration system that was beyond anything that had been done before, but we should be clear that much of the cruelty has existed prior to the Trump administration coming in, going back to the exclusionary history of immigration law in America, but then also continuing through what was called welfare reform. That was the immigration reform, so-called immigration reform, that actually began the criminalization of immigrants in the United States. And so the work that we do here in Congress as representatives of our communities on so many levels is incredibly important, because we get to change the conversation about what the issue is and what we need to do. And we also get to change the conversation about where to put the priority for legislative fixes to the issues that we are facing. And we have an opportunity coming up in the reconciliation package to do the right thing for immigrants. Not just for immigrants, by the way, to do the right thing for America. Because let's be very, very clear, America would not survive without the labor and the toil of immigrant communities. And that is why I am so excited about the opportunity to actually advance a path to citizenship for Dreamers, TPS holders, essential workers, farm workers in the upcoming reconciliation package. This is an opportunity for us to actually face the truth about who it was that kept the country going during the COVID-19 pandemic. The COVID-19 pandemic only underscored how our communities and our economy rely on the work of immigrants. Throughout the pandemic, immigrant workers have filled a broad swath of duties, from picking and preparing the food we eat, to cleaning our homes and community spaces, to serving as frontline medical professionals and the heroic teachers that educated our kids over Zoom. We are talking about an estimated 5.2 million undocumented immigrants who were serving as essential workers, nearly 15,000 DACA recipients who have pivoted to remote learning as teachers, 1.7 million immigrants working in the food supply industry to put food on our tables, and over 200,000 undocumented immigrants working as healthcare practitioners, including as registered nurses and home health aides. That is why we put as one of our top 5 priorities for the Congressional Progressive Caucus in the reconciliation package a roadmap to citizenship for these essential workers. 1 million of these undocumented essential workers are also dreamers. Just a few weeks ago, a judge in Texas cruelly ruled against the DACA program, stopping the government from processing new applications and once again throwing the status of hundreds of thousands of DACA recipients back into limbo. This is not what the American people want. It was yet another urgent reminder about why we need to end the filibuster in the Senate and pass the Dream and Promise Act that we already passed multiple times in the House of Representatives. This, though, cannot wait. We cannot wait. And so it's time for us to act in this upcoming package. Further, over 7 million immigrant essential workers do have legal status, but they only have temporary status or are waiting to adjust their status. And when we talk about immigrant essential workers, it's crucial that we recognize that many of them do have legal status and have been waiting, in some cases, in waiting lines projected to last over 80 years to transition to a roadmap to citizenship. I know that when I became a citizen, Madam Speaker, it was after 17 years of being on multiple visas. And by the time I became a U.S. citizen, it was impossible for me to uproot my family, my parents, and bring them to the United States to be with me. And that is why they still live in India, and I live here. I have not lived on the same continent as my parents since I was 16 years old. Every day, essential immigrant workers put their own health and the health of their families at risk, showing up to work on the front lines so that we and our families could stay safe. And they do all of this knowing full well that a simple traffic stop could tear them away from their families and communities, that they, should they get COVID, that they likely wouldn't have access to health care. For instance, TPS holders have been serving on the front lines even as the former president rescinded their TPS designation and threatened to rip them away from their communities. Recognizing the tremendous contributions of immigrants, countries like France actually acted to expedite citizenship for essential immigrant workers. Not only is that the right thing to do, it's also good for our communities and for our economy. Most of these workers have lived alongside us as friends and neighbors for over a decade. They are deeply rooted in our communities. Many have U.S. citizen children and family members, and tearing them from their homes and their families would leave gaping, irreplaceable holes in communities across the country. Moreover, if doing the humane thing isn't enough for you, and if doing the popular thing isn't good enough for you either, then look at the economic benefit. In 2019, immigrant essential workers had an estimated $860 billion in spending power, and that's after paying up to $239 billion in federal and payroll taxes, as well as an estimated $115 billion in state and local taxes. So it's clear that immigrants are helping to sustain our communities and bolster our economies. Now, you and Mr. Bowman were talking about the importance of going to the border. And I just have to recall some of the worst cruelty that I saw in the last 4 years. I was the first member of Congress to go into a federal prison where mothers and fathers who had been separated from their children, in many cases babies as young as 3 months old under the previous administration, the previous president, when they were imprisoned. These parents were imprisoned and separated from their children. And when I went to see them a couple of weeks into this crisis, and as the first member of Congress to do so, and I met with hundreds of parents, mothers and fathers who did not know where their children were. Some of them were given slips of paper that had names of children on them, but guess what? They weren't their children because DHS had lost all trace of which children belonged to which parents. And what we know today is that there are still hundreds of children who are separated from their parents. Their parents have been deported in some cases, and they will never be reunited. And this was by design. This was a cruelty of epic proportions, perpetrated by the last president and everybody who went along with those policies. Not all Republicans did, by the way. I remember when Laura Bush spoke out against this and said, this is not who America is. Well, I have a different perspective on that because we've had a lot of things happen in America that remind us that we have a bad side to America as well. But we have resilience, we have refuge, we have humanity. And when that trumps, that is the best of America. The reality is, Madam Speaker, I went down to the border as well, multiple times. In fact, I see my colleague over here. I think he called me, I forget what he called me, but I think he called me a Congresswoman coyote. No, I'm not yielding to you, Mr. Gates, but appreciated that because I helped children come across the border as a member of Congress. How could anybody be against that? These were children traveling alone. And had I not been there as a member of Congress, they wouldn't have gotten over and been able to be processed because the last administration actually closed all of the ports of entry. So when I went to Tijuana and I met with so many of these people, I remember a 15-year-old boy who had been shot in his knee, and his mother said to him, just go as quickly as you can, because his brother had already been killed by gangs. Just go, just go, just try to get there. And this was a strapping young boy, and he wept as he played me the message that his mother had left him so that he could listen to it over and over again in the shelter that he was in. To get away from gangs and violence. This is what we're dealing with. And so that's why I've introduced the Roadmap to Freedom resolution, which lays out a positive vision of who America is and who we should be and who we can be if we continue to embrace those roots by which everybody came here, unless you were Native American. Either you came enslaved on ships against your will and were forced to work and your labor was taken, or you came as an immigrant in some category. And the reality is, Madam Speaker, there are many things that we have to do. Thank goodness this new administration closed the Irwin Detention Center, where women were being sterilized without their consent. Thank goodness that for-profit private detention center was closed in Georgia. We had that resolution, that was my resolution on the floor, and you know what? It passed with bipartisan support. Members on the other side of the aisle as well, who couldn't stomach that. Couldn't stomach that. So we have an opportunity here to do something really tremendous in the next reconciliation package. And I know firsthand that our immigration story is one of struggle and resilience. Immigrants push boulders up mountains, and we succeed because we have to. There is no other option for us. And it is that strength of courage that comes out of struggle that is what defines America, defines immigrants in America. So I look forward to doing everything I can to make sure that the Congressional Progressive Caucus continues to push for bold, progressive immigration reform, and that we make sure that we get a path to citizenship for our essential workers who have been taking care of all of us through this pandemic. I thank you, Representative Leger-Fernandez, for your tremendous work, for your leadership, for your heart and your passion, and I yield back to you.
Thank you very much, Representative